Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Reformed Dissenters, the show where Reformed Christians dissent against popular ideas of culture by asserting a biblical worldview. My name is Bruce Johnson. I am joined today, as always, by my brother Jacob Johnson.
Hello.
He's in Pennsylvania. I am in South Dakota. We're also joined by a special guest today, and if you've read the title, you see that. Our title is Building a Christian Culture with pro wrestler Kyle Hessler. Welcome to the show, Kyle. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for having me on, you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we met you at the Fight Laugh Feast conference in Knoxville, Tennessee a couple weeks ago, and we were chatting with you, and you just had so many cool things to share and so many interesting perspectives, and we were like, dude, we got to have you on the show sometime. So here you are. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm very, very excited. We're kind of kicking off a brand new series on building a Christian culture. You know, we talk all the time about applying all of Scripture to all of life, but now it's time to get into some of the details. What does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? But before we get into all of that, we have to start the show out, as we always do, by talking about our verse of the week. Before that, though, remember, you guys can go to trdshow.net, which is our show website. We've all got all sorts of cool stuff on there. We are on so many different platforms, and we're getting banned by more and more by the second. So follow us on pro-First Amendment platforms that don't love communism and hate free speech. Don't follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Rumble. Follow us on Gab TV. Follow us on Gab. If you're on Facebook and Instagram, you can follow us for now on those platforms until they kick us off. Instagram already kicked us off once, so we'll see what happens. But you can follow us on those platforms, sure, but we'd much prefer you follow us on platforms that actually like free speech and don't love communism. So do that. Go to trdshow.net. That's our show website. We've got a list of links to all of those platforms there, so you don't even have to look us up. Just click the links on our site. Send us an email, trdshow@protonmail.com. We want to hear your thoughts about what we've been talking about on the show. We've got a brand new series coming up. Let us know if you have questions. What is your vocation? What do you do for a living? Who do you want us to have on the show next to talk about your vocation? Maybe it's software engineering. Maybe it's being a chef. Maybe it's being an auto mechanic. How do we work for the kingdom of God in all areas of life? Let us know what field you're in and what field you have questions about. We'd love to answer those questions. Also, send us an email with topic ideas for future episodes. If you are interested, again, in what vocation you're in, how do I work for the kingdom in this vocation, or other questions you may have, we are always looking for topic ideas. Send them to trdshow@protonmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Our newsletter is trdshow.net. Our mom does a wonderful job putting together content 3 times a week, sends that out, just tremendous job putting that together. If you're not signed up for that newsletter, it takes 30 seconds. You really want to do that if you want to stay up to date on all of our episodes and more. We pack a lot into those emails. trdshow.net/newsletter is where you can go to sign up for that. All right. So that was a fun intro. I think that's the fastest I've ever gotten through that. So that was pretty good.
Oh, that's the fastest.
That
okay,
is the
good.
fastest. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to say.
Yeah.
So, with that, let's get into our verse of the week. This whole week, our verse has been Luke chapter 6, verses 20 through 23, and it says, "Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy. For behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets." And again, that's Luke chapter 6, verses 22 through 23. So we've been taking a lot of heat recently in the Christian community on a lot of levels. And by recent, I mean the past 2 millennia. We are never going to stop being persecuted by those who hate the Son of Man, who hate Christ and who hate his kingdom and his kingship, who love to sin and don't want to be forced to not do that, don't want to be brought under control of God's Holy Spirit. And of course, the last 100 years, haven't faced a lot of that in America, but now we're starting to face more and more very active, very verbal persecution. It's not just internet trolls anymore, it's very visible, and we talked about that on our current events episode. We've been talking about that for a long time. This is not the America that your grandparents knew and loved, because for generations we've stopped fighting for that America. But this verse should be a comfort. it seems completely backwards, because the beginning is, blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you, when they revile you, when they spurn your name as evil. All those things sound so lovely, right? So fluffy. It's just wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful
Yeah.
things. I don't know about you, but I don't leap for joy when my name is dragged through the mud. I don't leap for joy typically. My instinct and natural reaction is not to leap for joy when people hate me. But Christ here is saying, when people hate you, when they exclude you, when they revile you, leap for joy, because your reward is great in heaven. And
Yeah.
this is not new. This has been done all throughout biblical history. But one really important part of this verse that we like to gloss over sometimes is it's not just a general hatred. It's not you were being a lousy neighbor and your neighbor suddenly decided to hate you for it. That's not at all what this verse is talking about. What we see here is the second part of verse 22 says, on account of the Son of Man. When you are doing what Christ has called you to do, when you are working as unto the Lord, when you're working and seeking first the kingdom of God, they will hate you. That
Yeah.
is a good place to be.
Someone was putting it, it makes total sense for people to hate you when you're listening to a Christian podcast when you're supposed to be working.
Yeah.
But it's not right for people to hate you for listening to a Christian podcast, period.
Yeah.
But if you're actually if you're the one being the problem and people are hating you because you're the problem, then no, hold on. That's not, you're not blessed for that.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
it's when you actually are doing something that God has told you to do, and then people hate you for doing that.
Yes.
But I like this leap for joy aspect of it. Shout it from the rooftops, rejoice in it. And I love like the whole, just like the fight, laugh, feast motto there is just amazing in that whole regard.
Yeah.
In that you're when you're fighting, people are going to start hating you.
Yep.
You then laugh, you have joy, you rejoice in that people are hating you for fighting, and then you feast over it. And really, in all those interviews that we had with the people at the Fight Laugh Feast, with Doug Wilson, with Jared Longshore, we were asking them about what they thought of the conflict in Moscow, especially with the NBC interviews.
Yeah.
And they really were saying that the reaction in those churches was very rejoicing.
Yeah.
It was very in fitting with this verse, that they rejoiced, they jumped for joy. And I think that's really important, because then the enemy, then these NBC people who not necessarily were trying to hate on that whole community, they were talking about it, and I think they did have a direction and a goal with it.
Yeah, they had an agenda.
Yeah, exactly. But that they saw their rejoicing, they saw their joy, and it's like, dang it, we didn't do anything for that.
Yeah. Well, and doesn't Doug always talk about, if in regards to this verse, when you are being persecuted, the Lord's commandment is, he paraphrases and he always goes, you're meant to go around the corner and do a little jig to yourself. Which I always like how he phrases that.
Love
so
it.
It's really funny.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, great point there. So yeah, there's a lot more to delve into with that verse, but I think we'll leave it at that. We've also covered this on our Monday and Wednesday episodes, and seeing as how this is Friday, you've had a whole week with this verse as well. So thanks for listening. Let's get into stuff. So we have with us today pro wrestler Kyle Hessler, which is super cool. We met you at the conference, and you were talking about wrestling and how we can take back. You use the term wrestling is a redeemable part of the kingdom. It's a redeemable thing. We were discussing, how is it redeemable? Is it redeemable? So I'd love to get into all that. But before we do, I want to hear more about, who is Kyle Hessler? What's your life story? How did you become a pro wrestler?
Okay, just minor correction, and this is on my failing for not giving you a better biography in our email. So I've never actually pro wrestled.
Okay.
Now, I was a professional fighter. So the long story short is, I moved to Texas about 12 years ago with my MMA coach. He was a striking coach and was pursuing the dream of becoming a professional fighter. And I did that. Fought a couple times professionally, trained with a couple guys that were in the UFC. It was a huge blessing, great opportunity. And once that career was over, I got a pretty good sales job, got married, got in a great church, all that good stuff.
Wow.
And then I think it was about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I had decided to start promoting my own shows. And through a series of events, I discovered that pro wrestling is actually really easy to promote.
Huh.
I've always been a pro wrestling fan, so it was a pretty easy decision to say, hey, let's do this instead of like MMA or kickboxing or something like that, which on an eschatology level, I'm not sure is redeemable, even though I still do like jujitsu and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to open that can of worms, but just I think that'll come into play.
We're gonna be opening that can of worms. Don't worry.
Yes, good. But now we'll just put a little pin in that for now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I always big pro wrestling fan, and I did like a 2-day show with a 2-day show back in August of 2020, which actually I just found out was covered in a book, which was kind of cool. So I'm like, yeah, and I'll. It's not a book I would recommend all that much because I just pretty much read my section. But the guy gave me a credit as he's a Christian, and that's very important to his brand and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, cool. At least that part of it is being remembered that I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did this show, and I was like, you know what? Okay, there's something here. I didn't know if it was going to be like a one-off sort of thing or what we were going to do. And me and my wife decided that let's actually make a run for this. Let's see where we can go with this.
Okay.
And so over the last 2 years, we've been running a company called oops, I gotta go the other way. Pele Pro. It's on my shirt too.
Nice.
Pele Pro.
How do you spell
which
that?
It's PALE, but it's the E with the little dash.
Gotcha.
And that's the word you will find in Ephesians 5. For we do not fight against flesh and blood, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but the heirs of perils. Oh my gosh, I always get tongue tied with them.
Yeah.
The heirs and the principalities.
Yep.
So that I just thought would be kind of a cool brand name. So it's Pele Pro.
I love it. That's great. So let me back up a little bit. So so you were talking about jiu-jitsu, you were talking about martial arts, you were talking about all of these sorts of things. What is it that made you get involved in this wrestling, these very active person-on-person sports? What got you into that in the first place?
It's hard to say because I've done it for so long. So I got into what you would call amateur wrestling, so just Greco-Roman sport style wrestling. I got into that when I was I was like 10 or something.
Nice.
So I mean, I just kind of grew up with that. And then I got into jujitsu when I was like 16. So I've always just kind of been in this world, wrestling was always just kind of something in the background. I think the draw to it for me is there's something, I mean, you see it in scripture. There's multiple times where somebody is wrestling, both literally and allegorically. Yeah. So there's something there.
Jacob and the angel and
Yeah. And then like I said, Ephesians 5. Yep. There's one other example, but I always forget it. But so I've always just been drawn to it, and for like jujitsu, I really still enjoy that because it's competitive. Yeah. It's aggressive, but it's in a like very controlled and also very like a perfectly manly sort of. Yeah. I'm going through the Ransom trilogy. Okay. And in Paralandra, have you ever read that?
No.
Yes. I think I've read like the first book. That was C.S. Lewis's trilogy. Yeah.
So I won't ruin it then, but in the second book, the main character Ransom, who's being sanctified through the process, he ends up having to be in a battle. And it's a one-on-one, and it's very like the way Lewis describes it is like he would box and stuff like that. And it's just kind of an interesting thing. But my point of saying all this was there's something I think that in these kind of disciplines that there's something sanctifying about it because it is competitive it is
Yeah.
it like reforms you as you do it, but also like there's like problem solving skills and all this
Right.
different stuff.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think
And
that's really interesting because there's so many people will look at wrestling and forget that
Mhm.
there's like 4 different facets to it. I mean,
Right.
Jacob and I did jujitsu and tang sudo for years and years. I got my black belt
Right.
several years ago, and it's something we're very familiar with. And it's, there's the element of learning something new that's active. So there's a sport element to it where you're working on your cardiovascular system, really building up different muscles. You're keeping your body healthy and engaged, which is really important. We're called to do that as Christians. Right. But then there's also the sport. You're competing because men have a natural tendency to compete. We'll give them an outlet where they can do that, refine it, learn how to lose, learn how to win properly, all of that, which is really important, that competition element. But then there's also an element of self-defense, like you're actually defending yourself and preparing for the not inevitable eventuality, but the potential eventuality that you'll be attacked and you'll need to defend yourself, your family, your wife, your children, what have you. So yeah, there's a lot of elements to it. And I think it's really fascinating that you've kind of delved into that head first and looked at how is this actually something that we can take and redeem for the kingdom of God. So before we start talking about the process of how we can do that, what are some of the issues? We have to know the problem, right? So what are some of the issues with pro wrestling right now and that whole industry that you would really like to hone in on and resolve?
So just real quick, I'd like to just kind of like, let's set the grounds of everything we're discussing. So jiu-jitsu, I'm still doing it. It's a martial art. It's competitive. It's physical. You have wrestling, amateur style, Greco-Roman, similar. And then you have like MMA, boxing, kickboxing, things like that with striking, all that kind of stuff. Pro wrestling is, I think a lot of people want to say it's fake, but it's not fake. It's scripted. So it's still physical, but it lacks the competitive nature, at least in the sense of, those guys are still really competitive, but it's obviously a different competition. They're not competing about who's winning and losing. They're competing in terms of like artistic means, right?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of what's redeemable, the thing that I've kind of come around to, and what me and my pastor talk about this pretty regularly in like a post-mill sort of way, is as much as I love, and I trained with a couple of people that are UFC champions. I trained with what's her name? Valentina Shevchenko. I've trained with her a couple times, and she's still, I think she's the UFC women's bantamweight champion or something like that.
Wow.
So I've been in that world. I just don't see how it's redeemable. Part of it's because I think how it would look if it's redeemed would look so different than what it looks like now. And it's not
be a different
blood,
sport entirely.
Yeah, it's not even so much that it's like the blood and guts element of it. It's like there's just so many cultural elements of it that you'd have to pull back anyway before you could start discussing what's actually the core of this. But leading into the pro wrestling side, because pro wrestling is not competitive, or it's competitive, but it's not, it's not a competition in that sense. The reason I think it's redeemable is like, I mean, we're just telling a story here. So at the end of the day, in the 10,000 years from now, are we still going to be reading J.R.R. Tolkien? Are we going to still read C.S. Lewis? Are we going to still read all these great, books of fiction?
Yeah.
Why would we not?
Yes. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, of course, we could all be wrong, but but I tend to think that like the whole nature of God is storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's something that's going to go away. Obviously, our stories are just going to get better and better and better. Yeah. And they're all going to reflect Christ more deeply. But I'm trying to figure out in pro wrestling how this art form, this type of art form can be redeemed. Because I just see it as another type of like a play, a musical, opera, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it's a different quality. I'm not denying that it's like, this isn't the same thing as like, I'm trying to think of like a famous movie and comparing it to like a Marvel. I'm not denying that it's like a lower quality in terms of its ability to articulate high-end concepts as an art form. I'm not denying that, but I just think that it's something that I'm like, I see it, I'm part of it. I think it's something that we can see becoming redeemed, and we could tell really good stories through it down, in 5,000 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, that even though it's like not as good as like in story wise, being able the ability to tell a story, it's still something that must be changed for Christian and brought to a Christian value. And really, if you say, okay, let's forget about that, let's push that aside, let's not think about that, let's change some other things, it then becomes like this festering boil over here that's just continuing in its own own stuff, own sin, and it's going to have to be dealt with at some point.
Yeah, and you know, really, I would love to ask how this, going along the same lines as what Jacob was just describing, you know, you've reformed a lot of the rest of culture, but this one, you know, this part is remaining. And I think of it as part of, like you were just describing, Kyle, it's part of the entertainment industry, right? So what do you think, what are some of the other elements of the entertainment industry that have kind of bled into pro wrestling and all of that, and have kind of impacted it? What can we do to fix some of those sorts of things?
I'm sure that there's like a way I could probably sit down and kind of like map it all out. But I would imagine that there's something like, here's like, you know, if you circled it, there's like, here's like the surface level. These are very easy. We can see them on their face as sinful. They need to be removed. Yeah. So like things like, I tend to think female wrestling is not a good idea. And we can go into that in a deeper sphere. Yeah. But even on the surface of what it's at now, you know, some of these women, I hear from them. I'm not trying to downplay them or their abilities or their skill sets that they've developed. But at the end of the day, a lot of times I'll hear, oh, the athleticism, you know, like guys want to see, and like, come on, let's stop. They want to see the women dressed in short clothes, right? I mean, that's what it is. Yeah. So it's not as bad as MMA, where it's like I can't even watch women's fights in UFC. I used to be able to, but I just can't stand the sight of seeing a woman get brutalized. And in pro wrestling, maybe they don't get brutalized, but I just don't want to see that. I don't know how that's redeemable, but that's a deeper issue. So there might be the issue of like inappropriate behavior, both sexually and immoral, or, you know, character stuff, you know, people doing like Satan gimmicks or something. And not in a way that's like, we could actually use this for a better story. It's just kind of doing it to do it. So there's stuff on the surface that's like, obviously this just has to be expelled. Like this can't, there's no way that this can be survived. On a deeper level, you might have stuff like the concept of women's wrestling as a whole. Like, is this because they're not competing, is this something that can be redeemed? I tend to lean no, and it's pretty strong no, but you know, it's in a little bit deeper area. It's a little bit more of a question. Yeah. And then at the core of it is more things like, well, what kind of story, like how wrestling is structured, what kind of stories can we actually tell that are redeemable? You know, like the means of which you have to tell them are these things that are even sanctifiable. So like a very big example.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Well, I had a question kind of related to what you were discussing earlier with, you know, women being in pro wrestling. Right. How do you think wrestling connects to masculinity and promoting that? I mean, obviously we see in the entertainment industry today, masculinity is frowned upon, biblical masculinity of men defending women, defending their families, not being polluted by all of this garbage that we see, and actually standing up, being men as the Bible defines it. How do you see wrestling playing into that on a cultural level?
So if you, without going too far into the history of wrestling, one of the things that's really discouraging for me when I go to other shows or when I look at kind of what the industry is doing, because a lot of times some of the temptation that's presented to me is, you know, you got to go with what people want. And so like a big thing that's really popular on almost every level of wrestling, except for maybe the WWE, is, and it used to be in the WWE, they would allow it back in like the 90s, but it's really taboo right now, is like men versus women violence. Yeah. And it's I don't even want to go into it, how grotesque. I've been at shows where it's like, I'll just put it this way. it's one thing for us just as Christians to talk about a man beating up a woman. But here's the thing that's really perverse in pro wrestling, because you got to do a story and you got to have a bad guy, good guy, your heel, your bad guy, your face, your good guy. A lot of times in these men versus women matches, they will do the woman as the bad person, so she'll come out and like smack the fan's hands or talk smack to a fan or whatever. And then she'll get in the ring. And then in the course of the match, she'll do something to kind of cheat. And then she'll kick the guy in the gonads or something like that.
Wow.
But the whole design of it is to get the crowd to boo the lady. So that, but then, and this is the general structure of wrestling, right? The general structure is bad guy does something to get the crowd upset. Good guy has to overcome. Good guy struggles, beats the bad guy. Crowd goes home happy. That's the general gist of it. So if you think about it like this, they're having the girl be the bad guy, so that when the good guy beats her up and wins, that's the part where you go get excited about.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about,
which is on a deeper level is more hurtful to especially men's inner nature.
Yeah.
That
or
God
what should be
put into us. Yeah. And it really just beats that down of us wanting to protect women.
Yeah. Well, and I also think one of the most important things the Bible stresses about masculinity is self-control. That's top of the list.
Yep.
Is self-control. And even when you're defending your family, you're attacking, someone attacked you, you're defending them, you have to use violence, but even that is self-controlled. You're not in a monstrous rage, you're still in control, but you are going to win this fight because of your family, your family's at stake.
Yep.
So that level of self-control, you're now perverting that self-control. You're saying they're attacking this person, and yes, they are in control and they're doing it for the right reasons, seemingly, right? Setting that up. Yeah, I had no idea that was a thing. That's
well,
insane.
and so you kind of extrapolate this out, and I mean that's like a very, I wouldn't say niche because it's on more wrestling shows than I'd care to admit, but it's not like it's every show, but the kind of what you call the wrestling psychology, and that's just like how you tell stories and all that different stuff. It's so backwards and perverse of how they want, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy. Right. And so you're talking about like what's crept into the entertainment industry or kind of like correlating them. Yeah. I would just say it's like, it's not understanding your world. So a lot of times, what was it? I was really struck when I watched, I didn't really care for it all that much, but the Infinity War was Avengers. Yep. So I was struck by like, listen to what Thanos is saying. And in some ways, he's like, we as Christians almost want to agree with him in some ways, because like what he's like, where his heart is at the matter, he was being genuine. He was just, wicked and depraved. Right. But at the same time, think about like, this is what I'm trying to articulate is just how backwards the entertainment industry is. Right.
Yeah.
So today we have people talking about hunger, and like we had Stacey Abrams say abortions might be the solution to inflation. Yep. Right.
Yep.
And it's like, I sit here and I go, that movie was like 6 years ago. And when it came out, I thought, do they even understand how to tell their own stories? Like he seems like their good guy. Right. Right.
Right. So that's exactly what they want to do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when it comes back into the wrestling thing, there's a lot of times where it's like, it's really hard to tell, well, wait a second, who's supposed to be the good guy and the bad guy?
Yeah.
There's a guy that works for me. His name is Shane Taylor. He's a great guy. And he probably is a little bit, he's not woke, but like he's probably, down that road a little bit further than I am, certainly. But he does like he's a black guy, and he used to do a gimmick where it's like the angry black guy sort of thing. I'm probably not doing it really good justice because he did a good job of it. But the thing that was always weird was it was like kind of dabbling into the like BLM stuff. It played into that, and that's why it was smart. The problem was crowds didn't know how to really react to it. So if he goes and he knew how to manipulate that because he's a great performer. But the problem is our culture is so backwards. We can't even really put into place who's the good guy and who's the bad guy.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
So,
wow. Well, this has been great, Kyle. We're already at 29 minutes, so I really appreciate it. What are what's one final takeaway, one thing you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up today?
I would just say, your theme is really vocations. And this is obviously like a unique
Very unique.
vocation.
Yeah.
But I would just I was just kind of go back to things like when we're talking about these things, I think of Brother Lawrence. You know, he's a little short book where it's this monk, and he just talks about his job is to sweep the monastery, and he talks about sweeping to the glory of God. And it's very encouraging because whether you're promoting pro wrestling, you're doing a podcast, or you're a bus driver, or whatever it may be, God is glorified in your work.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean like level of achievement ultimately comes that much play into that element of work. So I would just say for what we're trying to do, we see an art form that should be redeemed and can be redeemed. And we're just striving to figure out what needs to be done in that. So,
amen.
It's been fun. Yeah. It'll be a journey. Obviously I probably won't be alive to see the end of it, but it's, we've seen fruit. We've seen fruit in our time of wrestlers. One guy came to faith. He's been coming to our shows for a year, and he was baptized. So I'm sure we had an impact. He hasn't told me explicitly, but I can't imagine we haven't had some sort of impact.
Right.
Yeah. Planted the seed. Yep.
Yeah. And then one of my top wrestlers just yesterday was talking to me, and he was articulating my position about women's wrestling to his girlfriend, who's a wrestler too. And it was very, like, the way he explained how he explained it to her was very respectful and delicate, but articulated basically our concerns. And so it was like, okay, we're obviously, there's some growth
happening there. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow.
So before we end the show, could you talk about your involvement with Lore TV and your stuff there, so people can
I didn't even hear about that.
Your show?
Oh, this is great. And Bruce didn't hear about it, so this is even better. I was gonna plug this if you gave me a chance to plug some other stuff. So we are, a lot of what I've been talking to you guys is summed up in our documentary series that we're doing on Lore called Wrestling With. So right now we have I think it's like a 12-minute teaser trailer that Darren Doan made for me.
Nice.
And the whole concept of the show is we've got 2 seasons made. We just need to have them edited. Wow. So once Lore gets going, and then we'll be good.
That is
but the whole concept of the show is we're going to follow 2 wrestlers for one season, one for the other. And in the background, we're talking about these things like, hey, Christians, what do you think about this art form? Here, what the guys have to go through. Here's how this can be saved.
Wow.
So that's kind of the idea with it. Yeah.
So where can they? Go ahead.
We already saw that trailer.
Yeah.
But so that's why I bring this up. So go ahead, Bruce.
I was gonna say, where can they go? Is there a link they can go to see that, or where can they go if they're interested in following you too?
Lore.tv, and then just scroll through, and there's Wrestling With. I think if you just even Google Lore Wrestling With, it'll pop up right away.
Awesome.
So that's our documentary series that's going to be growing as Lore gets funding. So when Lore is ready to get funding,
you're saying,
fund them and then fund
Lore.
us.
Yeah.
So that if you're interested in our kind of project as far as that goes, definitely check that out and follow it as it develops. As far as like our wrestling show, we're only going to do stuff in Texas for the foreseeable future. So come out to a Pele Pro show. They're every first Saturdays every other month. So November will be our next show, November 5th.
Awesome.
Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and follow me on Twitter as well, because I that's where I post more controversial things.
Nice. And you haven't gotten banned yet, so sweet.
I actually did.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well, congratulations. Good job.
My Instagram, Facebook were all taken down. So I've had to build them back up. No fun.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. All right. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining it. I really appreciate it. Yeah, super cool. Don't forget, everyone, check us out on Monday. We're going to be back talking about current events from a biblical perspective. If you haven't seen our Wednesday and Monday episodes already, check those out. Our website is trdshow.net. Share it with as many people as you can. trdshow.net/refer. You can earn yourself a free mug, free stickers, and free t-shirts. So make sure you sign up for that and send that link around. Thank you so much for listening today. And don't forget to check out Kyle Hessler on Twitter. And remember, everyone, in all that you do, do it as unto the Lord.